Pleasure to introduce our next speaker this morning. Holley Murchison is founder and CEO of Oratory Glory, a communication agency and speaker collective catalyzing diversity. She's an entrepreneur and communication strategist who uses her passions for art, culture, education, and ingenuity to disrupt traditional education systems, helping emerging creatives, entrepreneurs, and leaders communicate authentically and effectively. Holley, welcome to the stage.
Growing up in the 80s in the crack era in Harlem showed me a lot of what the dark side of the world could be. But when you're in a community where everyone is lifting each other up, you see the bright side of things. As a kid growing up in a city like New York, it's very fast-paced, and if you don't speak up for yourself, it's easy to get swept away. And I was actually a really, really shy kid growing up. I was an introvert. Though I was quiet, I was always absorbing. And so I learned a lot of different people's communication styles, what made them tick, what pisses people off, what makes them happy, what gets them to really do. Over time, there were these opportunities that presented themselves. And if you don't learn to speak up for yourself, others will. And you may not like the story that they're telling about you. I found my voice through being present. I think there's something really special about showing up, right? In our lives, so much fear comes up from the things we're afraid to do or afraid to try. And for me, owning my voice came from feeding my curiosity. You're owning your voice to leave your mark. It's like, imagine you're here for 75 years and you never spoke up for anything you believed in, or you never shared an idea that you thought could really change something. And I really think that in being here, if we're going to be here, there is a necessity to add value somewhere. And if you're not adding, you're subtracting. So in owning your voice, you create an opportunity for yourself to really leave a mark once you're gone. Good morning. All right, that's my time. I've done what I needed to do. Thank you so much to Maria Teresa for setting us off this morning. Thank you to the MCON team for inviting me to be a part of this experience. It's always a blessing to be able to connect with the next generation. And shout out to all of you. You're looking brilliant and beautiful and ready for action this morning. So let's get it started. Now, I want to make sure I'm in the right place. So how many of you want to leave your mark on the world? All right, excellent. Because the world needs your story now. And as we engage in this conversation together over the next 20 minutes and think about this theme of identity, we're going to explore a piece of how you can begin to extract that story that you want to tell for whatever body of work it is that you're trying to build or contribute to. Does that sound good to y'all? Okay, I heard some murmurs. I'm going to take that as a yes. Fantastic. All right, so I want you all, before we get started, to think about the stories that you consume every day. Just take a minute. Think about your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram, your Snapchat, your news, whatever outlets that you're plugged into. And I want you to think about the stories that sadden you, the ones that motivate you, that piss you off, that frustrate you, that ignite you, right? From Syria and Standing Rock to climate change and immigration, and yes, you can clap and woo, right? To this notion of having to build a case for why Black lives and Black bodies matter, right? We are living in a moment that often feels like it's laced with complete uncertainty, sometimes chaos, and a lot of fear. But I know you all know, like I know, that it's absolutely unsustainable to live in fear, right? And that's the power of all of us in this room. Even if we're afraid, terrified, we're all useful. And we're at a critical moment in our time where it's absolutely necessary for us to be able to authentically express our truth and confidently articulate that usefulness to the world. So I want you all to think about a different story now. I want you to think about the stories that you've been telling about yourself, right? When you're networking and when you're out and about, those stories that you're talking about how you want to make a difference. So I want you to raise your hand if you've nailed that story. If you talk about what you do and people get it everywhere you go. Okay, crickets, good. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you fumble with that story sometimes, if it's challenging to bring all the pieces together. It's all right, don't be shy, look around. Because you're not alone, because it's no easy feat. And I've been there myself. Over the last 15 years of my work, I've navigated through over 20 jobs, and I've launched 2 businesses of my own. So I'm sure you can imagine I'm engaging in a number of conversations where I'm constantly being asked what I do. Not why I do, but what I do. And I'd always fumble and get nervous trying to juxtapose my reasoning behind why I transitioned from radio to project management, or education to communications. And I worried that people would think that I wasn't focused, that I lacked direction, that they would judge me or misunderstand me. Like, this girl is doing the most, right? 20 jobs, 2 businesses, what are you up to? And there was nothing to be ashamed or worried about. And I didn't know it 15 years ago. But what I've learned is all of those skills I was exploring, those curiosities that I was leaning into, not only were they bringing me closer to myself, but they were also grooming me for my purpose. In order to contribute at your best, it is absolutely necessary that you become and exist fully and freely as all that you are. So the melding of all those parts, those intricacies, those quirks that people call you weird for, those skills and passions that you've explored, that's what shapes your identity and makes you a one of one. And it also helps you inform how and where you'll add value. Because if you're not adding, you're subtracting. And unfortunately, we don't live in a time or space where we have the luxury of subtraction. But what we do get to do is decide how useful we can be, right? And because we get to decide that, it's so important to remember that how we become who we are and how we arrive at change is through iteration. It's a process. It's not an end goal. So, in continuing my endeavors and my work now as an entrepreneur, an education strategist, and producer, I've had the opportunity to work with thousands of entrepreneurs, of students, of educators, of executives, and similar to you, they struggle with, and me, they struggle sometimes with how to tell an accurate story that conveys the work that they're trying to do in the world, right? And so what does that mean, right? I've been excited about doing the work with these folks because I realize we're at a critical turning point where if we don't find ways to tell those stories, we're in a lot of trouble. And so I decided to do something about it. All these conversations, all these people doing great work, I embarked on a 3-year learning and teaching journey where I designed and refined a 6-step training process in my forthcoming book, Tell Me About Yourself. And it's an action guide for being able to craft articulate, compelling introductions, not just for talking about your work, but for moving the needle and taking it to the next level. And I've got 13 minutes on stage, so realistically, I can't walk you through all the steps, and the book releases in September. But before I leave today, I want to share one of the steps with you. And what you're looking at on this screen, they look like 4 circles, but I want you to imagine them as discovery buckets. These are the 4 wells that we draw from when we're telling stories about ourselves. And we're going to walk through each of them, and I'm going to give you some guiding questions so that hopefully today you can begin to extract what that story is for you. So if you don't have a pen and pad busted out or whatever tech piece you want to type notes in, now would be a fantastic time to do that. All right, so up first we've got background and interests, right? And on the surface, this is like, I'm from Harlem, so I love buildings because New York City is full of buildings, right? On the surface, that's what it seems like. But your background and interests, those are the grounding things that have molded and shaped you into who you are. So I want you all to think about where are you from and how has that impacted you and what you're doing right now. So for me, as you've seen in the video, growing up in New York, growing up in a city in the crack era, really showed me so many of the dark sides of the world and the light sides. And because of where I'm from, it actually led me to a career in service. So think about your background and interests, right? And as we think about that first discovery bucket, it leads to the second, your values and beliefs. And I love to think of these as those things that you would fight for or die for, but you choose to live for them instead, right? So what are your top 3 core values and core beliefs? For me, I know it's love. I think love powers all things. Empathy and freedom. And I mean the freedom to be fully self-expressed, to be fully who you are. And the second question I want you to explore for yourself as you think about what are my top 3 core values and beliefs, are you doing work right now that is aligned with those values and beliefs? This is not a judgment. You don't have to respond. If the answer is no right now, then you know where you need to shift and pivot. So our values and beliefs inform our passions and aspirations. And all of these buckets tie into each other. And as we think about passions and aspirations, those are all those magical things you've dreamt up in your mind that you want to contribute to the world based on what you've experienced, what you value, and what you believe. So I'm a big dreamer. So I want you all to think about what's the biggest dream you have for yourself or the world and why? And why? You probably need some more time to sketch that out, but just humor me and doodle just a few notes of that down for now. And as you think about that big dream or that big vision you have for the world, what are you doing right now or have you done to grow closer to it? And if the answer is nothing yet, that's fine. You've got the dream written down. That's a big part of the first step. So when we think about these 3, this background and interests, your values and beliefs, your passions and aspirations, that informs that 4th bucket, your skills and achievements. And sometimes this can be the most complicated part for people, but I like to think of it as what my homegirls call your receipts, right? This is your proof of the doing behind all that dreaming that you've done, right? And it's challenging for some folks because raise your hand if you like to talk about your skills and achievements. Does it feel like you're bragging sometimes? Like, I can't do that. I used to feel like I can't tell you who you would be. But why, right? It's actually about honoring all the skills that you've actually been granted naturally by a divine power, or that you've devoted years and years to honing. And the accomplishments are the proof that you are applying those skills to actually fulfill your purpose. So it's not about bravado or ego. It's about standing in confidence and in faith, knowing that you can make the world a little brighter. And how else are you going to find your tribe if you don't talk about the work that you're doing in the world? It's crucial. So these 4 discovery buckets are what lead you to who you are. They will help you find your unique voice, help you figure out how you want to contribute and add value where you are. And that knowing, that route, that journey of becoming, that's what we've been talking about today. That's self-actualization. And as you begin to self-actualize, it's important not to disengage from the process. You have to continue to think critically about who you are, how you're experiencing the world, and how you want to add value to it. Because when you do, it's contagious. And I mean the good kind of contagious, not like chickenpox contagious. It literally creates a domino effect. And the people around you begin to do the same. So the more you lean into who you are, the more you connect with other people, the more you form relationships, the more you build with others doing the same. And that's how we scale change together. Now, we're in a world that's at odds with its biggest atrocities and challenges right now, so there is no more urgent time than this moment to become who you are. And I want you to take another good look around this room as you think about your values and beliefs, your background and interests, your passions and aspirations, and your skills and achievements, because there's 500 other people in this room, just like you, who are trying to become their best selves to add value to the world. I urge you to find them and connect with them. You've got the entire day to do that, because the world needs your story now. Thank you.
All right. A lot to unpack there. I'm from North Dakota, so I'm an ambassador of the state. That's my story. Just a reminder, if you want to get in on the conversation, we have some people already asking questions, but please do it online, and I will try to get to all of them. So I just want to start, kind of back up a little bit. How did you get into this? I mean, what was the process a little bit? I mean, this is a fully formed book. Everything's coming together, but I feel like probably a lot of people in the audience are maybe taking that first step.
Yeah. For me, I've always identified as an introvert, and I was really shy growing up. And I don't like networking. The question of tell me about yourself, what do you do? It's but what do you mean? It's such a broad question to embody how layered we are as humans. And I run a communication agency. So I'm like, I can't teach people how to and not do the thing. So I really started to define the process for myself. And I really started to extract and think, well, what do people really mean when they like tell me about yourself? And like, how do you dissect all the different spaces where you ask that question? And I'm like, oh, it's not the same answer all the time. So I tested the process out on myself and then started using it on my clients. And I was like, it's impossible for me to reach the world with this one by one. So let me put it in a book.
Well, that's great. Yeah. We have a lot of people weighing in on the question, saying, can you talk about the balance between finding power in your voice while being genuine about your vulnerabilities?
Ooh. I like made my hair stand up, the little ones that are up there. I think vulnerability is power, right? And so once you're able to tap into the most vulnerable sides of yourself, you realize how strong you are. Like, I cried this morning. I feel powerful when I cry. And I think a big part of that is being okay with being vulnerable. And once you're able to acknowledge the power in that, then I feel like you can take on anything. But it takes time, right? Like I said, the process is iterative. It's not like, tomorrow, I'm gonna be okay with vulnerability. Like it doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
One of the questions that a lot of people are asking about is kind of finding your voice when there might be people who are louder. So, you know, how can you show your passion when other people might be louder than you are?
Yeah. I think a big part of it is figuring out what your superpower is, what that secret sauce is, right? Because usually the loudest people in the room are sometimes the more insecure people in the room. Mm-hmm. And I think empathy plays a big part of that, and being able to acknowledge, like, yes, you have a voice and I hear you, and I also have something of value to add here. So a big part of it for me always begins with, what's my strength in this space? Like, I know I run a communication agency, and there are tons of communication agencies, but I know mine is focused on helping people speak from the seat of their soul. And even being comfortable with that language, I'm like, I think that makes me kind of stand out a little bit, because seat of your soul is
it's the first time I've heard
specific language, yeah.
For sure. What can you tell people? You talked about being an introvert. Mm-hmm. You know, if you have insecurities or vulnerabilities, how can you use that or take that and turn that into maybe more of a power instead of something that's going to hold you back?
Yeah, I think it's important to be able to identify what those powers are. And I think being an introvert is powerful, because you're usually one of few people in the room who's actually listening to everything that's happening. And listening is such an important part of communication, because you're able to assess what other people are thinking and what other people are feeling and how you can add value more specifically. So I lean into my introvert strengths all the time. I've been, accused of not having anything to share because I was so quiet. And it's like, I like to add when I have something of value to add to the conversation, but I'm definitely always listening.
What would you tell people in terms of, kind of how do you get people to get to that next level, that digging a little bit deeper beyond just the what do you do conversation?
Mm-hmm. You mean in conversation?
Yeah, in conversation. There's a lot of people who are kind of wondering about, in DC in particular, what do you do is kind of the first opener for most people. But how do you get beyond that kind of in the conversation?
Ask more interesting questions. Right? And I mean, it seems very simple on the surface, but if you know you hate the question, like, tell me about yourself, don't ask people that when you're at an event. One of my favorite questions is like, oh, what are you working on that you're excited about? Because the challenge with asking people what they do, you might be asking someone who hates their job what they do, and they're just like, I don't want to talk about this.
It's a conversation killer right there.
Absolutely. I'm like, but ask more interesting questions. Things like, what are you most excited about that you're working on? Or, what brought you here today? Why are you here today? And I think letting the conversation naturally take its flow from there, and asking more interesting questions as the conversation pivots, right? Like, oh, I'm working on a great project that is a book coming out in September. How about you? And I think the bounce back of the conversation is really what's most useful for making it feel real and authentic.
What's your advice for people who might disagree with somebody's story or someone's views, but you want to empathize? Particularly in this time, there's a lot of disagreement that can come to the fore in a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I love that question. I think a big part of I'm challenged by the idea of disagreeing with someone's story, because I think it's really important to honor someone's lived experiences. And I think you can often agree to disagree. My partner and I agree to disagree all the time. And I think it's also about not entering the conversation for the sake of being right, but entering a conversation to learn and absorb. And sometimes you might realize like our beliefs clash so much that I actually don't want to engage with you anymore. And you can make that choice. But I think, again, going back to the idea of like listening first. And, you know, I hear what you said about this point, but my perspective is this. And you can engage in meaningful debate in that way without like negating someone's experiences.
Have you ever dealt with the lack of confidence or anxiety about expressing yourself fully? I mean, it sounds like you've been through a process.
Yes. Yes, I have.
So everyone here that's asking you about it, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And my trick for that, and I think it's just how I'm wired, is to throw myself into the fire. And growing up in a space that was pretty traumatic, I grew up in a space where it was pretty much sink or swim. And so you learn to survive by doing everything that you can, or just showing up as you need to show up. And now I've changed that to a space of thriving. So I'm like, this feels terrifying, means I probably have to do it anyway, so let me just dive in. And that was how I honed my communication skills too. I joined a storytelling contest when I was shy. We had to memorize an entire book in 3rd grade and read it on the stage.
Man.
And then from there, I was just like, all right, let's just keep swimming.
We are about to wrap up, but before we do you have any tips for overcoming the idea that maybe your story isn't worth telling?
Oh, yes. Talk to people you love, right? We've all got a friend who believes in our story, who believes in us. Talk to those people as much as you can. Talk to yourself. I have morning affirmations that I read every morning, and my affirmation this morning was, everything that comes from my lips is a prayer. And I was like, okay, then I guess we're gonna have a great day then.
There you go. All right, Holley, well, thank you so much for your time here today. We appreciate it.